My grandfather, whom I call Tata, would visit us every few years for months at a time. And in 2020, he was here when lockdown started. As there was really nothing to do, my friends were wary of hanging out in person, and school was canceled at the time. Tata and I resorted to taking long walks together to pass the time. I love him very much, and as the youngest grandson, I felt a very close and special relationship with him as we walked through the neighborhood together. And while walking, we discussed proverbs in Kannada, which is our mother tongue. But after some time, he decided to stop going on walks with me, and I finally worked up the courage to ask him, Tata, what's wrong? I thought you loved going on walks with me. And he puts down his newspaper and hesitates. I still do. It's just that when you're outside, where do you go and you gotta go? I really wanted to solve his problem. I wanted to try and see if I could find a walking path with bathrooms on it so he'd feel comfortable so we could resume the walks. But searching online for public bathrooms near me yielded incomplete or outdated answers. Sometimes, you would get listings of bathrooms that ended up not even existing anymore, and you would get other ones that were from a private business, which we weren't allowed to use. So I then was kind of stumped. I didn't really know where to proceed. I knew I could count on maybe a town hall or a public library, but past that, I was really unsure. And I was thinking maybe a public park would have a porta potty, or a public building might allow people to go in. So I was looking up, listings of public buildings in the towns near me and public parks, and at the bottom of every page there was a contact us link. So I decided that I might just email them. And I inserted a lot of apologies of wasting their time with my stupid little request that, I was just trying to find a walking trail for my grandfather, but I needed a list of bathrooms so that I would know where to map it out. I hacked away at these emails for different municipalities, but only a few days later, I got one email back thanking me for my effort, but they didn't have a list of bathrooms. And up until this point, I don't think that I'd ever understood how to solve a problem on my own, because as the youngest, I always had my older brother or my parents or my grandparents to ask, and they would either have paved the road ahead for me, shown me steps on how to solve a problem, or would have solved the problem for me. But here was my grandfather asking me this question. And growing up in the internet age, you could always search online for these sorts of things, but Google was failing me in this case. I didn't really know what to do here. And I finally had the realization that my grandfather wasn't the only person suffering from these issues. Of course, other elderly people would have his condition, and there would be people who have different conditions. And there are parents with toddlers who would need to find restrooms. And especially, there would be people whose jobs took them out and about, like taxi drivers or delivery drivers. And so these people must know where to find restrooms, right? And I decided to poll social media. I decided to ask the neighborhood's Facebook, the subreddits for taxi drivers and delivery drivers. And I asked them, where do you find bathrooms when you're out and about? Where do you go when you gotta go? Echoing my grandfather's plea. And over 200 stomach-churning responses flooded in. I read about taxi drivers having to relieve themselves in wide-mouth bottles in their cars, and I read about racial minorities who were arrested for trying to use retail restrooms. I finally realized that this wasn't just about bathrooms, but about human dignity and fairness, and I realized how I'd been blissfully unaware while Tata was silently struggling and my community was failing its most vulnerable. I then emailed the city officials again, hoping that I could naively convince them that public bathrooms were a problem and that they needed to be listed and they needed to build more of them. But I was met with benign skepticism and assertions that existing facilities were already sufficient. And more often than not, I was met with, "We do not have a list, stop emailing us." I started complaining to my tata. I video called him, and I almost cried. I was saying, they're not taking me seriously. I'm just a kid. But he was never one to tolerate self-pity, and he offered a proverb: learn how to count to comprehend the world, he said. And inspired, I decided to gather more concrete data to make my case. I decided to, instead of pestering city officials to give me a list that they clearly didn't have, instead to go to each listing and call just about one public park or one public building, does that specific one have a restroom? I called 311 numbers, police stations, fire stations, town halls, public libraries to get their bathroom availability, wheelchair accessibility, stall counts, just to make sure that they had a bathroom and all of its information. And my painstakingly curated online map grew to over 400 restrooms, and it's become a key resource for residents and visitors alike. And my work even got awarded by Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, and it was mentioned in many news stories. And to this, I called Tata again, and I was ecstatic. I was bouncing. I said, Tata, they mentioned my work on NBC Boston. Somerville is building 3 new restrooms. How did they manage that? He asked. Well, I did what you told me, I said. Learn how to count to comprehend. And he beamed. He said, actually, the full proverb ends with, as you can't change what you can't comprehend. And as usual, he was right. I've come to understand that convincing people that public bathrooms are important is the easy part, but navigating bureaucracy to influence change is much, much harder. I'll keep trying, even though there are no easy buttons, to make sure that one day Massachusetts leads the US in helping people relieve themselves with dignity. But for now, I can't wait until Tata visits next year. I picture us teasing apart his favorite path in Somerville, which is now restroom accessible. Thank you.